I think obviously, definitely the abortion arguments, I think, are the ones that have caught on the most. That's the one that I've
Yeah.
seen the most of. And in my opinion, I think that, well, I think is the case for every conversation these days. But especially with abortion, I think you have to have, like, for me, like, my personal stance is that I also believe that life begins at conception. I do. I don't really necessarily know of any other way to define life, its beginning and end, other than to say it begins at conception and ends when you die. And I think that when you try to moralize or rationalize some other definition of life, it becomes kind of shady, and it kind of crosses over into, like, now you're just kind of putting your own morality on it. Well, now I want to say 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And it does seem like over the course of time, for me, I would generally support abortion up until the first trimester. But that's not because I don't believe that life begins at after the first trimester. It's because I'm willing to attribute a certain moral value to that and say, okay, it is a life, but I'm honest enough to just admit that I'm okay with aborting a life before 3 months. And I think a lot of
Why?
people aren't okay
Why?
with that.
Why do you think that?
Well, I think there's certain. I think that.
One. I'm gonna tell you. I feel like you fucked up bringing this abortion thing up. But go
Well,
ahead.
I don't know. I agree with Jimmy because it's at the same time you could say like, hey, cancer
Well, hold on,
it grew on
real quick,
itself inside of you, and I don't
Eric,
think you have the
real
right to
quick,
take
man,
it out of you.
Yeah, but Eric, before your thing, I'm asking Jimmy specifically just because he brought up that point. Why do you think that?
I think that there are values that we can either acknowledge or not acknowledge, moral values that we attribute to life. For instance, and I'm not going where you think I might be going with this, but we actually had a debate, not a debate, but a question that a couple of viewers answered last week, which was, if you are an ambulance driver and you pick up somebody that was shot to death, or not shot to death, but is dying in the ambulance, and then while you're driving away, you accidentally hit another person with your ambulance. Does the ambulance driver stop and help the other person, or do they keep going to take the person who's already in danger for their life, call another ambulance? Like, what do you do? At a certain point, you have to say, and one of the things that I was thinking was, well, at that point, you'd have to look at, okay, was the person that was shot to death, was that, if you picked up a 75-year-old man that was shot and dying in the ambulance, but then you ran over a 6-year-old kid on the way to the hospital, my mind would go to, well, you gotta go help that 6-year-old kid. In my opinion, that you would be basically placing a higher value of life on that child than you would for that elderly person, simply because of all the factors that exist. So I think
But what you're talking about, you're looking at a philosophical argument, right?
Yeah.
So it's really just straight up philosophy is what you're talking about. But I guess what I'm saying is that I don't feel like that has anything to do with the direct question that I just asked you, right? So like you brought up the fact that look, I believe that abortion is the taking of a human life. However, I believe up until the first trimester, which I think is 12 weeks, right? I think 12 weeks is like
I think so,
the end of the first trimester. It's like, look, I believe up until the first trimester that it should be legal. And then are you saying like after that it shouldn't be legal? Is that what you're saying?
I would probably say that we as a society, if we're going to have abortions be legal, which it is the case that it is going to be legal, and that's a realistic that's a reality that I think everyone on both sides is going to have to accept. I don't see that ever.
I don't accept that. I don't accept that shit. Abortion has only really been legal for what, 60 years. You know what I mean? And like all of time, like it's been like illegal. It's only been legal here in the United States for like, well, not all of time. I'm not talking about like every country. I'm really just talking about since the United States was like established, right? But yeah, so it's been illegal except in very specific circumstances. But it really just became legal when Roe v. Wade in like 1972 or whatever that was, right? So and you have conservatives, obviously, that are pushing back against Roe v. Wade. You have individual states that are coming out with heartbeat bills, right, to limit abortion to like 6 weeks. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, I guess my thing is that when people kind of bring up the contention that you bring up, I just feel like it's morally inconsistent because you're talking about, look, I acknowledge almost, I'm going to tell you, Jimmy, like if I didn't know you, bro, if I didn't know you right now, I would straight go up into you and say, well, go up into you. That sounded kind of weird. But, I would straight go in. I would straight go in on you, bro, and be like, yo, that is an evil fucking stance. And the reason why is because if you acknowledge that that is a human being, but then also say, look, I get that that's a human being, but the woman should have the right to kill that human being. That to me is always evil, right? Now, if you were coming from like another place that said, look, I don't believe that it's a human being, and for that reason, I believe that you can go ahead and abort that thing, then I would say, okay, that's not evil just because you just don't believe that it's a human being. That's just more of an educational thing that I would have. But if you believe it's a human being, bro, and think that you should just be able to eliminate it, you would have to explain why you believe that it's okay to kill a kid, an unborn kid, and why the 12-week mark matters. Like, what happens at 12 weeks?
The 12-week mark matters to me not because I believe that life begins or ends there, but because, and an example that I've heard, and it's not necessarily something that I absolutely am 100% on board with, but it did kind of make me think. It kind of made me think about how when you put things into these terms, it does make you think. If you're in a burning building and there's 3 adult people, and then there's like, let's say there's like, I don't even know what it would be, but let's say there's like fetuses or something like that are still developing or anything
you mean like you're talking about like fertilized eggs?
Yeah. Would you save, and you can only save one group of people, let's say. I know this is highly hypothetical, but it is again, it's a philosophical question. Would you save the living people or would you save the fetuses? And I think most people, if they're being intellectually honest, would probably save the living people, because on some level we all understand that although those may be human lives, the people that are alive are, for lack of a better term, and I know this is scientifically inaccurate, but I'm not claiming to take a scientific stance on this, their life has more value. And that's just the way the way I look at it. So
at the end of the day, we're fucking animals, and if a pack of fucking gazelle or like zebra, if we're gazelles, you just fucking plop out a baby onto the ground, and it's a full-formed baby. But then a pack of fucking wolves come up. You're not gonna you're gonna run from that baby and let it fucking die.
And that's animal wilderness knowledge you're dropping, dude.
Yeah. Okay,
no religion,
so let me
no philosophy, nothing. That's just human nature.
Just instinct.
Okay. So let me go ahead and kind of talk about this whole thing. So yeah, this has come up before where you're like, okay, well, would you save these 3 adults, or sometimes with people, it's a 5-year-old child versus 100 fertilized eggs. If you're really pro-life, you should save the 100 fertilized eggs because they're all alive. It's 100 versus 1 child. You know what I mean? And that's just not the way that it is. So for one, just because you're pro-life doesn't mean that you aren't practical for one. So fertilized eggs, they haven't even been implanted yet, right? They could miscarry. We have no idea what's going to happen there. This is an actual 5-year-old child. So it's just a different stage of human life, right? And here's the biggest part of this hypothetical is you're being forced to choose, right? It's different, like if you're not being forced, but if you're forced to choose between these 3 adults and these 100 fertilized eggs, obviously you're going to choose these 3 adults because these fertilized eggs, again, we don't know if they're going to miscarry. It's in a completely different stage of human life. Just the same way that if you gave me the option of saving a 5-year-old child, a healthy 5-year-old child versus saving an 85-year-old woman on her deathbed, obviously I'm going to save the 5-year-old child. It's in a different stage of human life, right?
Yes.
So again, like when you are forced to have those decisions, you're gonna make, you're gonna come up with your own personal value as to why you need to save whatever. I don't think any person who is arguing in good faith would say that they would save the fertilized eggs. It's just fucking insane.
Yeah,
I mean, unless you're talking about some crazy hypothetical where it's like the last 100 fertilized eggs ever, and there will never be any other type of, babies born. But yeah, man, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it all comes down to, like you were saying, stages of human life. And I think everybody on some level acknowledges that different stages of life have different values. I mean, like you said, between the fetus and the 5-year-old and the 80-year-old, they all have different values. So when I'm testing these arguments,
to be clear, they have different values to you as an individual.
Yes, exactly. And all of value is based off of a personal view. Like for instance, like if I have a virus, for instance, if I have coronavirus, it's beneficial to the virus to do certain things in my body that aren't necessarily beneficial to me. And so when I say, oh, this virus is bad, or oh, this bacteria eating away at my blood cells is bad, that's because I'm attributing my own stance in the universe and what's beneficial or bad for me versus what's beneficial or bad for the bacteria or whatever. If a wolf chases me down in the woods and catches me and drags me back to his pack to eat, that's good for the wolf. That's good for the wolf. It's bad for me. So to say things are just inherently good or bad is all based off of who is judging, who's making the judgment. So,
yo, Jimmy, you gonna let one wolf carry you back to the pack? Bro?
No, I think I would
It's the alpha, dude. It's huge.
Dude, I think if I'm being quite honest, I think I could handle one wolf. I think I could handle one wolf, dude. My ancestors didn't make it this far to get taken out by one fucking wolf.
So this is me being curious. So like Jimmy kind of identifies libertarian. Some people would call you libertarian. And from what I know, I haven't done too much research into any of the shit we've been talking about. But like from what I've understood is like libertarians like less government control and more personal freedoms. So I never understood why abortion doesn't fall more in their alley. It's not like no, I don't want the government telling me I can't have an abortion because my wife's 8 months pregnant, the baby's about to die, and if she keeps it and gives birth, she's gonna die. So like she needs to get an abortion. And then also I think you refer to yourself as like a constitutionalist, and it's like, okay, so Roe v. Wade, it's in there, right? Or no? It
was a Supreme Court judgment.
Yeah, Roe v. Wade isn't part of the Constitution.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was, I guess, people on the constitutional side say that ruling was unconstitutional. I'm imagining.
Correct. We say it's unconstitutional anyway.
Okay. But also in the disregarding any of that, like it's already like in place. It's been in place your entire life. It's all you've ever known. So I don't know why pushing for, cause, they always say the grass is greener on the other side, and it's like, okay, great. Like we get rid of this thing that a majority of people think is evil, or not a majority, but like a percentage of people think is evil.
A plurality.
But what if once we get rid of it, then we're like, oh shit, it was stopping like 10 other issues from happening that we didn't even consider because we've just had it.
Okay, so let me go ahead and address that. So for the first thing you were talking about when it comes to libertarianism, I would tell you that most libertarians, at least ones that are not right-leaning libertarians, are definitely going to believe and say exactly what you said, and they're going to say, well, I'm not technically, and this is a complete fallacy, and I'll explain why, but they're like, well, I'm not pro-life and I'm not pro-choice. I'm just anti-government, and I don't want the government to be involved. That 100% is just pro-choice, right? Yes. So there's no way around that, because if you are a pro-lifer, or even if you understand the pro-life side, you are going to say that, look, pro-life, we believe that to be an unborn child, right? We believe that is a human being, and that nobody has the right to take that human being's life against their consent, right? So there is no. You either believe that it's murder, and that you also believe that murder should be illegal, right? So like murder is illegal and it should be. So, okay, so if you believe that murder should be illegal and you believe that that is a human being and it is murder, then it should be illegal, right? So they're really just trying to use it as some type of like neutral ground, which it doesn't. You're either pro-choice and you don't believe it's a human being and it shouldn't be, and it's not murder, or you do believe that it's a human being and it is murder. That's it. So the second thing that you were saying was, I'm sorry, what was the second thing you said?
I'll get to it, but if murder is murder, I feel like in most of the places where they're very anti-abortion, they do have the death penalty. So how is that any different?
Well, the death penalty isn't against innocent human beings, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, right. So pro-life has nothing to do with the death penalty. I mean, I'm personally anti-death penalty for a bunch of reasons. Not because I think that their life matters, but because I think that it gives the government too much power. I believe that the government gets it wrong. I believe that it's much more costly. It's much more costly than life in prison. So like just for like a myriad of factors.
Is it really more costly to kill someone and to have them live in prison for life?
On average, it's at least 2 times more expensive than to have someone spend their entire life in prison.
Oh yeah, because they're making money for the prison while they're in there.
Well, not exactly that, but I don't agree with that too. But it's more so just because they use more resources, right? They have to use like forensic evidence. They have to bring these people back in, more witnesses, more judges. They provide them with multiple attorneys, for free and all this other kind of shit, right? So they just use more resources. But anyway, so yeah, what was that second thing that you said?
Well, just to keep going on that, like that person is deemed evil, irredeemable. They have to go. We can kill them. But like, let's say, 12 week or 13 week after the first trimester. And that is still just a blank slate. It's neither good nor evil. And then I know in religion, you're not really like going to even go to heaven until, at least in like Catholicism and shit, like you have to get baptized and shit. So I don't know. There's just like, there's weird contradictions, at least in my head.
It doesn't matter.
For a lot of the things.
It doesn't matter if it's good or it doesn't matter if you believe that the fetus is good. The only thing that matters is that the fetus is innocent, right? So it's 100% innocent. In no way, shape, or form is a fetus ever malicious, right? It didn't ask to be there, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a natural part of human life and pregnancy, right? So it's 100% innocent. You're trying to compare that to somebody who may not be guilty. I mean, you have to, but we're just assuming in this hypothetical that they are guilty.
At least 10% of people put to death row probably didn't do it.
Yeah, and I think that
15, actually, it's like 15%.
Which is crazy. And that's the biggest thing for me is like, if they do get it wrong, which is highly possible. I mean, highly possible. That once they've killed you, there's no appealing that, you don't want to find out.
Exactly.
So it's like, that's the biggest thing for me. I've never really looked into it enough to have like a hardline stance on it.
No, but you had the right idea, bro. You totally had the right idea.
But I think the broader thing here is that I think the conversation we're having about, in this instance, abortion, is the way the conversation should be had. Because I think what happens on both sides is that in order to advance their point, they bring up, for instance, like on the left, they might bring up the whole thing of like, well, what if a person is raped or this, that, what if it was incest or all these other things, or, the whole woman's choice thing where it's like, well, if I believe that it's a human life and I also believe in women's rights, but I also believe in human rights, that the woman, I don't like when they kind of frame the argument in a way that takes away from the actual point at hand. Like you can agree with women's rights, but if you also,
it's just a red herring, bro.
Yeah. Red herring is a term I learned recently, which I like, and I'm glad to hear it used in a sentence for once. I was like, when can I say this? Because I'm going to say it
needed a lot of context clues to figure that one out.
Yeah, it took 28 and a half years at this point, but I think I finally got it. But I think,
man,
what we're talking about right now is, for instance, like I think we agree on this topic, at least myself and you agree on this topic up to about 90% there. And I think the only disagreement we have is a philosophical one, because I, unlike a lot of people that would be quote unquote pro-choice, am willing to acknowledge what is actually happening. And I think what happens is that in an effort to justify a pro-choice position, a lot of people take on an anti-science viewpoint on human life so that they don't have to feel like what they're doing is actually bad. And that is what bothers me. It bothers me when people ignore the people that are necessarily, I guess, if you say like, we believe in science. Well, if you believe in science, I think it's pretty straight and forward, unless somebody could prove me wrong, that human life begins at conception. So what this really comes down to is a philosophical debate, if you're willing to accept that. And for me, if we could simply bridge that gap, and then we could have the conversation of, okay, so we all agree, because if you don't believe it's a human life, then abortion is okay across the board. And in the 90s, when they were putting it across, they were saying safe, legal, and rare. And it's like, well, why rare? If it's not a human life, then why does it have to be rare? It should just be safe and legal. So obviously, at some point, you're acknowledging that it is not something that we should be doing. And that's why when people try to throw you off by bringing up these examples, like, well, what if she was raped? Well, a pro-life person would say, well, okay, that's a terrible situation, but I still believe this is a human life. Now, I would imagine, like, if you're saying like a woman, but that's also a way to throw you off, because it's called arguing the specific to the general. You're taking an isolated circumstance and posing it as the main thing, which I understand, because you are taking the argument to its limits to test it. Right. What is your stance on that kind of stuff? Like if it was rape or something like that, how do you feel about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so for one, it's exactly that. It's really just trying to use the minority to argue against the vast majority. I mean, literally, you're trying to use 1% of abortions to argue for the other 99%. Typically, how I start that off when someone brings that up is I would usually just challenge. I'd be like, look, okay, before I even give you my response, which I would still tell you that I'm pro-life no matter what, but even if I conceded on this thing and said, okay, abortion should be legal for like rape and incest and whatever. Okay, so then will you disavow the other 99% of abortions if we're only talking about rape and whatever? And every single time they're like, no. So then I'm like, well, then what the fuck are we doing here? You know what I mean? You're literally just trying to use this 1% to justify the 99. Why do you think that you could do that? Like, you can't do that like in any type of rational discussion. But anyway, I would still tell them, it's like, okay, look, even if the woman was raped or if it was incest or whatever, the circumstance of conception does not change my belief that is still a human being, right? Your emotional feelings, your whatever, while terrible, it's very hard to go through those things. I'm sure of it. Like, but nothing that you can say would supersede your kid's right to life. Nothing. There's not one circumstance.
I hear you. And you know what? I don't like I said, I agree with you about 95%. And I think this is the way this conversation needs to be had. And I think that there's a lot of people on both sides that don't have an interest in this conversation happening like this because it takes away from their agendas on either way.
And I think that when you get into things like specifically to abortion, and we can kind of like end this and kind of move on to the next thing. But but I think when you're talking about like things like abortion, even things like racism and shit like that, I feel like these are quote unquote highly triggering topics.
Yes.
And it takes a lot, especially if you're on the political left side. It takes a lot to not get triggered and to have like a discussion, because you have those people that'll say no uterus, no opinion. So your opinion is just invalid. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that every fucking woman that had a uterus was a fucking scientist. I didn't know that. You know what I mean? It's like, and you have those people, and then you have people that talk about racism. Oh, well, if you're not black, you wouldn't know how it is. You can't talk about it. It's like, well, I know statistics, motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's all that they're doing is just trying to invalidate you so that they don't have to have that conversation.